What's going on, everybody? This is a little bit of a different episode for this channel, the Hangout. Usually we have the Hangout podcast, or at least up until this point we've done the Hangout podcast with myself and Dan. Obviously, Dan's not here. It's just me. We got the whole different screen, as you can tell, which is pretty cool. First time seeing that. So those are for our regular Hangout podcast listeners. Other people coming here, you probably know exactly what you're here for, and that's probably from the title down below. So for the typical listeners, we will resume normal podcast probably next week. I think we're going to take a week off, and I don't honestly even know if this video is going to come up this week or what. I haven't even told my co-host Dan that I'm even doing this, and I don't know if he wants to come and film his opposition, or not opposition, but his opinions on ultimately this video, which I haven't even said it, but you guys know the video. We're going to be discussing Avengers Endgame, my opinions, thoughts, and just general overview of it. That being said, if you have not seen it, there will be spoilers, so if you don't want to see those, get up on out of here right now. I've got a few more things to touch on, and then we'll get into it, so you can stick around until then. So I will give another spoilers warning. But for those of you just here for the Avengers debrief, I don't know what we want to call it, overview, opinions. If you like the content, come on and stay. We talk about a lot of stuff on the podcast. It's good fun. We talk about a lot of fun, nerdy things like Avengers, Game of Thrones, anything you might like. So please check everything else out, and be sure to subscribe. So we'll get into the Avengers stuff now. Before, I want to say a few things. First of all, I am not an expert by any means. I don't have superior knowledge of the MCU, in terms of in-depth stuff like comic books, anything, any deep knowledge of the MCU, basically. I'm just a fan. I've been watching, obviously, I've watched all the movies leading up to Endgame. It's been, 11 years, and just a big fan. I even, personally have recently noticed, which I don't like as much, is that I've noticed I don't seem to remember as many of the smaller details in things like any of the Avengers, or, Iron Man's, Captain America's, Thor's, anything like that. So again, I'm not an expert. All this is my opinion, my thoughts on the movie, and things that were leading up to the movie, or opinions based on previous ones, that things in Endgame that may or may not have rubbed me the right or wrong way. We'll get to that later. And second thing I really want to cover is, this video might seem like I was not a fan of Endgame. It might seem like I should say I did have quite a few issues. I don't want to call them issues, but complaints about Endgame. But as an overall, I want to say, before I get into it and it starts sounding pretty negative, I did enjoy the film very much. I loved the film. It's one of my favorite in the MCU. But as we'll get into later, there's a few things that I just have questions about, and things I didn't like. So before you say, it was a great movie, I agree. It was a fantastic movie, and I loved it as well. And I'm guessing you did too. So don't hit me in the comments if you guys are going to be down there commenting, you're just a hater. I'm not. I'm just, and like I said, I'm not an expert. So if I say something that I don't know, so I'm looking for those answers. If you can put them in the comments, I'm going to say something about this and I have no idea what I'm talking about, go ahead and tell me, this is why this happened. That's not true. This is what happened. And anything like that. And then the third thing, I guess, is just kind of a reasoning why I'm making this video. And that's because I've seen a lot. Obviously, I saw the movie last night, and it's just been running through my head. I know, I'm sure a lot of you guys, if you're like me, you've watched 11 years of the MCU, and it's not over, but this phase, as they're calling it, I believe phase 3, is pretty much over in the Marvel universe, and it feels like a culmination of these past 11 years. It obviously is, and it feels like an ending. And so I know a lot of people were very emotional. There's a lot of different emotions overall: good, bad, sad, great, whatever. And I'm the same way. I've been thinking about it for the past I don't even know what time it is, but we'll call it 12 hours. And it's been a lot. It's been on my mind a lot. And so I wanted to talk about it and get some of my thoughts out. I've talked to a few people that know I'll say quite a bit about the MCU, and I've had some good conversations with people, and I wanted to get my opinion out to some other people, mainly because I have seen a lot of people on Twitter. I've seen other content creators really, 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 really complimenting the movie. But again, I like the movie too, so I'm going to compliment it a lot. But they seem to not. I don't know if they're going to have a later in-depth, this is what they didn't like. These are things they could have improved. But everything I've seen is like, people, especially these are more on Twitter, but people say, it was the greatest movie ever. The last hour was the greatest, greatest piece of film I've ever seen. And I don't agree, basically. I agree that it was a fantastic movie. I love the movie. We'll get into that again. But there's just some things that I just need answered for myself. And I think that ultimately you guys may agree with, because it just doesn't seem to add up to me. And again, I might be completely wrong, and you guys can tell me that, and I'm sure if I am, you will tell me that in the comments down below. So that being said, I want to get into the actual my points of the movie. And so here's the point where, again, spoilers are coming up. If you have not seen Marvel Avengers Endgame, go do so. Fantastic movie. Despite what I'm about to say, it was a fantastic movie, and you should definitely go see it. So I think I'm going to start on a good, happy point, just to let you guys know that I did enjoy the movie, and not everything was so negative. And that's basically like one of my favorite parts of the movie, or like connection back to another part in the movie, and that's with Tony, and basically almost not his introduction, and then his ultimate demise, we'll call it. And that's when he first figures out how to do the time travel with the inverted science, whatever you want to call it. And he's talking to Pepper, his wife, and he says he's figured it out, and he's talking to her about it, and he says, well, I could go help, or I could just go to sleep and forget about it. I can't remember the exact line, but something like I could just fall asleep. And Pepper says, yes, but would you rest? And I thought that was a fantastic line, because obviously, no, he's not going to rest. And obviously, as we saw, he goes and he helps them out, and he needs to, do his duty, we'll call it, as Iron Man, and help out the team. He's got the answer that obviously he knows they don't have. When he shows up, he knows, that, what's his name? Ant-Man has turned into a baby and an old man and all that stuff. So he knows he needs to be there. He needs to solve it, help them out, and do this. So I thought that was a fantastic part. And then all tying it back together at the end when he's dying, and Pepper says, it's okay. We're going to be okay, Tony. You can rest now. And like, oh, the tears. I didn't have actual tears, but it was just pulling at my heartstrings. And I know many of you guys seeing it, it probably... That was rough. I mean, very sad. The whole ending, with Tony passing and stuff was sad. It's the culmination of, like I said, 11 years. He was the original. He started off. I think Iron Man's the first one 11 years ago. And then on that point, I guess, I also loved right before it, when he's, I can't remember if he has the glove. I think he has the Iron Man glove, basically Thanos' gauntlet with the stones in it, and he looks at Doctor Strange, and Doctor Strange, I can't remember if I think he's holding something or something, but he just holds up the number 1 to let Tony know that this is the one where it works. And that kind of lets Tony know he needs to do what he's about to do, which will do what he probably knows is going to happen to him if he snaps his fingers, and that's ultimately kills him. And that was just super cool. It was awesome, because he had that conversation with Doctor Strange previously in Infinity War. There was the 14,605 options that Doctor Strange had seen, and only one worked. And then in Endgame, he talks to him and says, "Is this the one?" Tony talks to Doctor Strange, and Doctor Strange says, "I can't tell you." Because it won't happen. And we don't know why when he says that, but ultimately it's because it's going to kill Tony, and if he told him, maybe it doesn't happen. Maybe Tony doesn't do that. I think, but ultimately, when he did the number one, he knew that's the one thing that he needed to do. And while it's going to suck for him, he knows his family's going to be safe. Everyone else is going to be safe. They've already brought back everyone else. And that's just what he has to do. And he's willing to do so. So while that was sad, it was awesome. And that was just probably my favorite part of the movie. Obviously, it was sad to see Tony pass. Like I said, he was the original, we'll call it, Avenger, even though I know like Captain America's called the original Avenger. So from there, I think the thing I want to touch on is probably my two biggest issues with the film. Maybe not biggest issues, but I'll call it my biggest issues. And I think it ultimately was a thing that was because it was so hyped up and the lead up to this was so high that maybe internally it didn't live up to that expectation, but I don't think so. Ultimately, those two things are Thor and Captain Marvel. Now, again, I don't know the specifics, and I'm not an expert, but I'm fairly certain from the comic book, those two characters are like the biggest components, we'll call it. They really changed the battle against Thanos in Infinity War. I think it's all Infinity War. I don't know the comics. So Infinity War / Endgame, those two are the two badasses, right? Thor, and the problem too is Thor was such a badass in Infinity War. He was when he used the see, again, I'm not an expert. The frost whatever, where he teleports in after getting the axe. He comes in and he just starts wrecking, and then he takes on Thanos, and then in this one, not. Now they get their laughs out of the fat Thor. He's looking like the Big Lebowski, and I like that. That was funny. It was cool. But I think it should have been like a flash in the pan, get it over with, and then I don't know if. I mean, he's a god. I don't know. It's believable to me that he snaps his fingers and he's ripped again. I mean, that's just what should have happened. They could have given a real explanation. I don't know. He's training and he's better. And that didn't happen. So he stayed, we'll call it Fat Thor. I've heard Thick Thor, all these things, the whole movie. He did do some fighting, and he did play, we'll call it an integral role in the movie. It just wasn't as big as I thought it was going to be. And I know you guys are going to say, well, he was, depressed or upset with failing the first time around, and I understand that. One of the videos I saw discussing or reviewing the movie mentioned how they had already, the MCU had already done that, depressed state, we'll call it, with Iron Man, and when he has his panic attacks, and he doesn't even really know, he just can tell something's off, and Jarvis ends up telling him, you just had a panic attack, and it was really bad, or whatever. I can't remember exactly. Now the person that I watched was, I would call, an expert, whereas I'm obviously not, again. But how they already did that with Tony, and it was very real. It was believable, and that. Whereas with Thor in Endgame, it's just like a comedic relief thing. There's nothing to it. It's just odd. So I thought that was a bit, I don't want to call it distasteful, but I just wasn't a fan of that part. I just think it could have been handled so much better. I think Thor, should have been the badass that he was supposed to be. Especially, we have, like I said, he was a badass in Infinity War, and he was really good in Thor Ragnarok. And of the 4 main original Avengers, that being Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, and Captain America, he seems to be the only one that we can for sure say is going to continue on through the MCU Phase 4, as it looks like he'll be moving on with the Guardians of the Galaxy. So it was weird to see him not come back and be awesome. Now, I can also see a little bit of that rivalry with Star-Lord like we had in Infinity War coming up in the next Guardians of the Galaxy. That could be kind of cool, seeing them. And I don't know if they're, training together to get ripped, because there was the joke that Peter or Star-Lord is fat or whatever. So they could do something with that, but still, I don't think that's worth making Thor this, non-godlike character throughout all of Endgame. Sorry. So that's my one thing with Thor. I should say first thing with Thor. And then the other one is with Captain Marvel. Again, I believe from the comics, she is the one that really, takes it from Thanos' side to even / towards the Avengers, winning the fight. While that probably is the case because she spawns in, arguably she saves Tony, brings him back. But then in the final battle, she comes through, destroys Thanos' ship, and to some degree changes the way the battle's going. Thanos headbutts her, she doesn't move. So yes, she is a bit of a badass, and she does help. It just felt boring. I don't know. Where was she the whole time? It seemed like she was supposed to be this huge part in the movie, where honestly, and her movie had to come out before Endgame, but I don't know if it did. I mean, you honestly could have just teased it and had her in there as much as she was. It just wasn't important. She didn't feel important at all. Now I get it. It's supposed to be, and this is a point I have for several of my things, is this is like the end of those 4 original Avengers that I was just talking about. And everyone else has a future. There's, they're all in Phase 4 seemingly, and they're continuing on, whereas this is the end of those main 4, so we're going to make them the focal point. I just think that they could have done that while still needing that help. They already failed with everyone, so they needed the Captain Marvel. They needed, Ant-Man and all that. So it was just a bit odd. Going back to the Thor, we see him battling Thanos while Thanos has 0 Infinity Stones. So he's not stronger. And he can't even beat Thanos. But again, Infinity War Iron Man is arguably whooping on 5, 6 Infinity Stone Thanos. So that again just didn't make sense. Is it because of he's thick Thor? I don't know. It just didn't feel right. I didn't like it. So those were my 2 big issues, was Thor and Captain Marvel. I say those are my big ones, even though I've got other issues we're about to cover. But those were the 2 that really stuck out. Right when I left, I said, why? Why wasn't she a more prominent role? Why wasn't he the badass we know? But yeah, so you guys, again, I'm sure I'm going to get ripped for this, that, and the other. But again, I'm not a professional. I'm not an expert. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Again, this is just my personal opinion, and it's something I haven't seen anyone talk about. The next thing I want to talk about is the Soul Stone on Vormir. And the fact that Nebula knew what it took to get the Soul Stone. Why didn't... I know why she didn't bring it up, and I think it's a bad reason, and that's because they would have then had to address it, and there wouldn't have been a logical solution for it, I think. It just wasn't enough. I don't know. The movie's already 3 hours long and they didn't want to address it. She knew to get the Soul Stone, someone had to go to the cliff and get thrown off. Her and Gamora talked about it. That's what happened. She knew Thanos threw Gamora off the edge. But she just didn't bring it up. And then on that point, they send Hawkeye and Black Widow there. Isn't the Soul Stone, you're supposed to sacrifice the one thing or the person or whatever it is that you love? Now, I get it. They were very close, but I don't know if you can qualify, and maybe I'm wrong. Again, maybe it's just something you love, and they're best friends. They've been doing this together and all this stuff, so they love each other. So, but it seemed more like, to me, it was like the one thing you love. Maybe I got that impression because Thanos only loved Gamora. I'm not sure. But it just didn't feel right. And then again, I guess it shouldn't. I think they take the Soul Stone. I don't know. Maybe it's just a soul for a soul, and anyone just has to die. That's the way it feels. Because then they weren't sacrificing the other one. They were trying to sacrifice themselves, which is weird. I don't know if those are the rules of the Soul Stone or what. But yeah, Soul Stone. Why didn't Nebula mention it? Is that how the Soul Stone works? Am I wrong? How does that go about? And then the other thing is, how does, at the end of the movie, when Captain America goes and returns all the stones, how does he go about returning that stone? And does that one matter as much? Because when what's her name? The lady in Doctor Strange, when she's talking to Hulk about the split off time. Their reality being different and whatever, the dark reality, that's because she didn't have the time stone and couldn't protect the universe from their evil, whatever. But like that one doesn't technically need to be, I think. I don't know. I don't think it's that big of a thing, but when Captain was returning the stones, what happened there? So the next thing I want to talk about is Hulk. Now, in Infinity War, we got very little Hulk. We had Thanos whooped his ass, and he was afraid to come out, which I really liked. It showed Thanos' power. It was super cool, and I liked seeing Bruce, try to figure it out and ultimately do his best to help, being the Hulkbuster and all that stuff. And then in this movie, obviously, same thing. We're just days after. 21, 22 days after the Thanos snap. So he's still in the Hulkbuster, but then the 5 years later comes down and we have the Professor Hulk from the comics or close enough, which I thought was super cool. Now, the part I don't really like is he's not really involved at all. He doesn't really get in any fights. He's not in the battle at all. The final battle, he's holding up the debris so that Ant-Man and whomever else, who was it? I can't remember. Whoever's stuck, he's basically holding up the debris for them to get out. Then also, does Hulk ever get in any fight or punch anything that isn't an inanimate object? He doesn't do anything. He's almost useless. Now, he does obviously do the first snap with the, I don't know what to call it. It's not the Infinity Gauntlet anymore, but it's the Iron Man Gauntlet, which made sense. He's the powerful one, and you see the effect it had on him, which, yeah, that was super cool. And, is that his whole role? I mean, you have him in the movie to be that. I mean, he did a little help with the science, but he failed with the time travel. It's like, come on. And then the other thing is, when Natasha dies, I imagine, there seemed to be this true love thing there, and he's so upset he throws a bench into the lake. Like, that's it? Like, doesn't he get pissed? Like, I don't know. I just hoped and wished he would have been, again, badass Hulk, where he's slamming people around. I mean, grabbing Loki by his ankles and slamming him repeatedly. But that didn't happen. Let me just go through my notes real quick. Yeah. I think that's about it on Hulk. Again, quite upsetting, but it is what it is. I guess another thing on Hulk I have is we have his, I don't know, scarring, the wound from the snap. And by the time Tony's funeral, even if it's the next day, I feel like Hulk's regenerative powers, I guess the Infinity Stones are that strong. It just, I don't know, that seems a little bit unbelievable to me. And I know, again, I've talked to some people, especially one avid Hulk fan, and he might have been just more upset more than knowing of that it wouldn't have worked that way. But so that was a little weird. He's still got it looked like a burn with some cuts, I don't know, from using the gauntlet, and it's still there at Tony's funeral. A little weird. It's whatever. Speaking of the funeral, I know some of you guys, I'm sure if you noticed it, you've probably looked it up by now and you're not waiting for me to tell you the answer. But if you haven't or didn't notice it, there was a teenager, young man at Tony's funeral standing all by himself when the camera went side to side and showed the different parties at Tony's funeral. There was a young boy, man, adult, whatever you want to call him, by himself, and my wife and I were like, who is that? Apologies, my dogs went crazy. A little girl selling chocolate door to door. Not a big fan of the doorbell. Anyways, before I left off, we were talking about the young adult from Tony's funeral. Now, that is the little boy from Iron Man 3, the one that he basically is with the whole movie after flying to, I think it's like Tennessee or whatever. That's the barn, and he's the one that he sets up with all the gear when he's leaving. So that's the boy from that. It's obviously, it's got to be 4-ish years until Infinity War, plus another 5 after the snap in that we see in Endgame. So that kid's obviously grown up, and that's who that is. And that's it for that stuff. Now, I guess those are I do have two more things that I kind of disliked. The biggest one, and this is ultimately seeming to be, again, I mentioned Thor and Captain Marvel as my biggest disappointments in the movie. This one I really dislike as well, and it's, as I think about it more and more, it just bothers me. That's the Captain America using Thor's hammer. Now, I think that may be in the comics, but I'm not sure. My issue with it isn't so much that he uses it, because, there's that whole thing of the hammer goes to people worthy of it or whatever it is. And I'm okay saying that Captain America is worthy of wielding the hammer. My issue with it is when he used the lightning from it. Now, I was under the assumption that the lightning comes from actually, like, Thor controls it. It's not part of the hammer. And we learned that in Thor Ragnarok when the hammer's crushed, yet he still has the power. And I can't remember who it is that says it's a part of you. The hammer's just the weapon, and you can, transfer it and use it with the hammer. So why does Captain America have the ability to use the lightning? I really don't like that, and honestly, there's not many things you guys can say in the comments, like, it's because of this, it's because of this. It's just me, but I don't really care, because I think that's stupid regardless. He's a god, the god of thunder. Why does a mere almost just normal man from Earth be able to use this lightning? It really bothered me, and even if that one's in the comics, I don't care. I think that's stupid. Regardless, that's dumb. And everyone's entitled to their own opinion. That's mine. You guys might agree, Probably, maybe not. Who knows? So I really don't like that. And then this one's less, but like I get it. It's their comedic. Marvel's always had those little comedy things, and some of them worse, some of them better. I feel like Infinity War was very good about it. They were funny moments that weren't like cheesy. Endgame, same. They were better than previous movies, but a little worse, I want to say, than Infinity War. But when they're fighting and Captain America and Thor switch, so Thor is holding the hammer, like they both throw him or something, I can't remember, and then they catch him and they're holding the other one. So Thor's holding his old hammer and Captain America's holding the axe. Well, we know he's worthy to hold the hammer, but I feel like the axe is a whole nother level, basically, which, again, less important than the whole lightning thing, but that one I just didn't like. It was bad for me. And then my final bad thing about the movie, and again, I understand this one, is the lack of anything, really, like much fighting, much dialogue from our secondary / tertiary characters, whether it be the hero, the bigger heroes like Black Panther, Peter, Star-Lord, or Doctor Strange, or Spider-Man. We have very small, obviously they weren't there, but I feel like even when they were there, and I feel like if it were done a little bit better, if I would have, in my ideal world, there would have been either they got there earlier or it just went longer, which again I'd have been fine with if that battle. Ultimately, I feel like that battle itself the final battle wasn't that epic. Yeah, it's two huge armies, but you don't get into any specific battles. You don't see much fighting. They had which I really liked. They did it in Infinity War, what I call it like the female battle, where they have in the first one it was Black Widow, Black Panther's guard, and was it Scarlet Witch, I believe, versus that one of Thanos's. What are those? Doesn't he call them his? Whatever, the main general in the female general in Thanos' army. This is from Infinity War, and then you have almost the exact same scene in Endgame, where you have Valkyrie and Scarlet Witch and all these females fighting. I believe they were fighting others. Captain Marvel's obviously there in this one. Anyways, I can't. Yeah, who are they? Did they fight other females in Thanos's army? Must have. But so that was kind of cool. But that was like one of the only few, like, kind of, you had this huge battle, and let's zoom into a smaller, more intimate fighting. You didn't have much of that. Where in Infinity War, I felt like while the whole scale of the battle wasn't as big, but still huge, you had a lot more of that. There's the part where, again, that female battle. There's the part where Thanos, where Thor comes in and he does his thing. You have, wasn't there the one where Bucky holds up Rocket and he's shooting? So you don't have a lot of that in that final battle, and I think that took away from, since that was pretty much the only time those secondary heroes came in, you don't have a lot of that. We don't hear much from Star-Lord. We don't hear much from Black Panther. I feel like Black Panther we had the most from. A little bit of Doctor Strange. And I love those characters. Doctor Strange is one of my favorite characters in the MCU. But he's not in as much. So that I wasn't too happy with. But again, I get it. This is the end of those original Avengers. Iron Man's not coming back. Captain America doesn't look like he's coming back. A. B. If it is, it's going to be what he did when he went back. It's not going to be now. Thor looks like he's going to be with Guardians of the Galaxy. And Hulk, I don't know. I think all of them want to be done. I think Thor, Chris Hemsworth decided after Ragnarok, since it did so well, I think he's like on board. But I think the other ones, they were all done. So this was the end of those guys, even though, again, like I said, Hulk didn't even really do anything. So I get it. That's why those secondary heroes weren't as big roles, but I still think there could have been more. And then I guess that, like I said, that final battle just didn't seem epic. It was epic in scale. It wasn't epic in the. It was your typical your prototypical when they say quantity versus quality. There was a whole lot of quantity in terms of size, amount of troops, the battlefield. It just didn't. It felt big, but eh. And then the quality seemed low. Not in terms of like it was a bad battle, I guess, but there just wasn't those intimate fights and stuff like that. I don't know. I'm nitpicking and I know nothing, but this is just how I felt. Now, the funny thing is, we're just a couple hours away from the Battle of Winterfell, Game of Thrones season, the big battle we have in the final season, and these two came out. So we have Avengers coming out Friday, Thursday night, whatever you want to call it, and then we have the Battle of Winterfell Sunday night, and like I said, it's in a couple hours. I went into this weekend. I love both. I love the MCU. I love the Avengers. I love Marvel. I love Game of Thrones. I went in to this weekend with a preference I was more excited for Avengers. I call it 51-49. They were both neck and neck. I love them both. I can't wait for both of them. But I was more excited for Avengers. You know, it's a 3-hour long episode. It's the ultimate, the finale. It's going to be epic. Obviously, from my points, it seems like I was a little disappointed. So now I'm like all in on Game of Thrones, which I hate because I wanted, and part of it is because I can just about guarantee you this Battle of Winterfell is going to be lit. It is going to be crazy. People are going to die, and that's fine. It's going to suck, but it is going to be amazing. So hopefully that, I don't want to say saves the weekend, because again, I did love Endgame. So I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to complain about anything else. I would, and I've said, my gripes and complaints. I've said some things I like too. One thing I didn't cover that I really liked is, and this goes back to a lot of people saying, this is the best. It was the best last hour of film, or that last hour was the best hour of film they'd ever seen. All these stuff. I've seen lots of things, and I just wonder, what do you get from that? Why you're not sponsored by Marvel? Whatever. And I think watching back, I liked the first half of the movie. I loved when they went back and we got to see, even when the movie started, the very first scene is Hawkeye during the time of the very first Thanos snap, and his family is disintegrated. I love that. And then again, going back to when they went back in time to get the stones, I love seeing what else now in the going back for the stones, they're doing their own thing, but I like to see what was going on that we didn't see the first time around. So with the Hawkeye scene, and I know Batman versus Superman did that very well, showing the very beginning what Batman was doing during Superman's battle against whatever his name was. So they did that well, and I thought that Hawkeye scene was awesome. Seeing, it sucked. It was sad, obviously. It was great to see what he was up to and what what's going on in the rest of the world while this huge battle was going on. Because I think you forget about that. It's all in this superhero world. It's all in the superhero time, and we're seeing that. But there's a whole world going on that is affected, obviously, in this situation more so than a lot of the other ones. So that was cool. And then again, like when we're going back to see the stones, and they're creeping around, from the very first Avengers. So I really liked that, and I loved seeing like Loki and that. And I was really glad to see Loki, we'll say, got away when he got the Tesseract. Loki was one of my favorite characters in from the MCU, and I'm excited to see what he has. I know he has his own show for the Disney Plus service, so I'm excited for that. And yeah, I think that's about it. Again, like I said in the beginning, I'm not an expert. I don't know probably half of what the hell I'm talking about. So be kind to me in the comments. But I just wanted to, get this out there. I don't see anyone talking about these yet. I'm sure many people will cover some of the things they didn't like. I've seen a few things, but nothing as an overall arching theme, kind of how I felt. But again, I'm not an expert, and again, I did really enjoy the movie. I know I watched one video where some guy ranked his movies, and I think he had Endgame as his second favorite. He did his top 5 Marvel movies, and it's hard for me to know. It's hard for me to do this because I'm going to do it on the spot. But I think I might put Endgame in my top 5. I think I might put it at 5, but from there, I don't know my other rankings. I know I would definitely put Infinity War. That one might be number 1, honestly. Also a huge fan of Doctor Strange. I think that would be in there. Big fan of Ragnarok. That would probably be up there. As for that, maybe Civil War. I was a big Civil War fan. I like the first Avengers as well. That one was amazing. But so I did like this movie. It's got to be up there as one of the best. There were just a few things that I obviously just stated that I questioned and I'm wondering about, basically. And feel free to let me know, what if you agree, if maybe you didn't think of it that way, if you thought of it this way. Let me know what you're thinking. Like I said, I don't know everything, so your input will probably help me understand better and say, oh, okay, that makes sense. So feel free to comment down below and let me know. Again, we will be back to normal podcasts probably starting next week. And I don't know if this is the end of my portion and then you're about to see Dan's reaction from the movie. I don't know how this is going to work, but if you've gone this far, if you watched this much, thank you very much. And hope to see you guys back for another video. Thanks.